Europa, das sind die Bürger, das sind wir.
Europe is the citizens, us, and the Charlemagne Prize is a citizens' prize, and that's been the case for 71 years. And as part of this tradition, we are very pleased, we welcome all elements that encourage citizens' participation. So we thought that it would be a good idea to bring together a few people today who can talk about Europe, and perhaps we can open up the playing field on what we can expect from this conference. We should not expect too much. Best possibility to disappoint yourself is to expect too much, but not to expect too little either. What are we talking about? What subjects will encourage European solidarity? How can we improve this? Or should we remain regional in order to avoid change? These are the most important subjects that we could include in a performance specification for the future. And of course, in all the events that will come up, we wish everybody good luck so that we can deal with all the subjects on the list of things to do. We have a moderator for this evening. You know her from the ARD European magazine, Mrs. Brenninkmeyer. A good evening from the heart of Europe. I'd not actually asked where you are at this moment, but the great thing about digital working is it brings Europe together, and we haven't even moved anywhere. So I hope that we have a successful evening, and perhaps let me say we founded the Charlemagne Prize Academy 2 years ago, and it's about dealing with future subjects of Europe for young people who have something to say. We're in the second year of research, but still at the beginning. And today we have two of our fellows in the program, and we look forward to their contribution with the more experienced members. So I wish everybody an enjoyable and successful evening, and we'll see you later.
Well, thank you, Professor Pepe, for this. I would love to be in Aachen, but unfortunately, I'm not there. I'm a Dutch person by born, but I am near Strasbourg, so I can also talk about Strasbourg pretty well. A very warm welcome to all of you. I can actually experience this in my magazine. Talking about Europe is not so easy. The topic seems so bureaucratic, and it's very, very hard to raise awareness and attract attention. But at the same time, citizens perceive Europe as being too controlling. The Brexit was like a wake-up call for Europe. Something has to change. French President Macron, in his Sorbonne speech, therefore actually came up with the idea of holding a conference on the future of Europe. Then the pandemic arrived, but now we're there. It starts on Sunday, on the Europe Day. So the online platform has been live since April, so everybody can pick the events. This is one of the big benefits, that we can now actually meet digitally. And this is why I listened to some of the discussions via video conference. And maybe you can also have a look at it. You can easily find the link when you Google it. And if you want to post anything, the hashtag is Die Zukunft gehört dir. The future is yours. And maybe you can find it. But there is one big question hovering in the room. What's happening with all of the content, with all the proposals, the criticism made by citizens? How will this turn into future? Or to quote Steinmeier, our federal president, we do not only need a joint account, but also a binding idea. And Manfred Meder, the EPP president, said we shouldn't shy away from unusual, out-of-the-box ideas. ideas, and these need probably changes, treaty changes, major changes, but many EU members have already announced that this is probably going a little too far. So how can the conference, or what will the Conference on the Future of Europe mean? Will it be a game changer in our history books, the beginning of a new era of cooperation, something that following generations can benefit from, or will it be considered afterwards as a nice try to change things in Europe? What can we still do where we still have so many possibilities to opt in the right direction and open up a new chapter of history? We have two panels, high caliber panels, and of course we have you, dear participants. You're free to post your comments and questions, and we collect these comments, sort them, and whenever possible, I will actually introduce your comments into the debate. And I would like to start with our first guest. This is the Secretary of State at the Federal Foreign Office, and I'm happy to have her. Please welcome Michelle Müntefering. Well, dear friends of the Charlemagne Prize Academy, I'd like to welcome you from the Foreign Office. The Conference on the Future of Europe, which will begin on Sunday, is an invitation to all Europeans to get involved and to really jointly shape the future of Europe. The conference is also hoped to become a pan-European think tank for the future questions, big and small. And I think that this conference is very timely because now we also have to learn the lessons from these times of pandemic. And it is about charting the course now. It is the question of digitalization, climate change, research and supply chains, and many, many more things. But the central point, the pivotal point of all capacities to act in Europe is solidarity. Because Europe, after all, is not a fair weather community. We stand by each other when it counts. This must be the pivotal point, and this is what we need to prove time and again. And this was also the clear message sent by the European Recovery Fund. It was an historical step because too big an imbalance is also a danger for democracy. Solidarity emerges not only through European treaties, solidarity also comes into being through personal encounters, through knowing about each other, through cultural exchange, and not last but not least, through the feeling that we belong together and that we actually share a will to shape matters jointly. And this is why one of the central learnings from the crisis is if we want to strengthen the solidarity, then it will be up to cultural exchange in particular. It will be about encounters. Digitalization can actually help us progress. This was also evident in this time, but the video conference cannot replace personal encounters. To actually quote Professor Prefi, we have to stay in motion, but digitalization can help to foster European exchange and put it on a far more broad-based foundation. If we can reach out to people who have not actually voiced their hopes, their fears, and have not become involved in the debate, can invite them to take part. And this was the objective of the conference, which we actually had last week. Europe takes part, the Italian and the Spanish Ministry of Culture Affairs, the EU Commission was taking part, the European Parliament was represented, and we had an enormous support that we felt. And it all shows that there is this need to actually debate about the future of a European digital sphere. Today's meeting shows that through digital formats, people from all regions of Europe can be brought together into dialogue. And I'm happy that on the central digital platform of the conference, even before the official opening, many concrete proposals have been made and already tabled. For the federal government, let me promise to you, it is important that in the framework that the proposals developed during the conference do not end up in some drawers. At the end of the conference, there must be graspable results, outcomes, and I am confident that science and academia can make a major contribution to this and will do so. And here, the Charlemagne Prize Academy comes into play, and the science promoted by it on tomorrow's theme. The contribution of research, science for our shared Europe must be strengthened, and the support of the Charlemagne Prize Academy represents this. 3 fellowships are actually supported by the Federal Foreign Office, and I would like to thank the fellows for their work. These research outcomes are not only important because of the scientific expertise, but also as a specimen of European research on and for Europe. The importance of a free and critical science cannot be overrated, especially now during these pandemic times. We can see how important science is for our societies, also as an object of international and multilateral cooperation. But we can also see the room, the space for freedom of speech. They're getting smaller around the globe, and this is why scientific freedom is one of the most important pillars of science diplomacy here at the Foreign Office. We just launched the Fabbrini program a few weeks ago, thereby initiating another program that breathes life into this. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I am convinced that especially what we need is this free dialogue between policymakers, science, and the society, and with the young scientific talents. This is important to make progress in Europe and to make this conference a success, but also to take up the global challenge that we're all facing so that we can actually cope with it jointly. And I look forward to all of the contributions and wish you all the very best. Thank you very much, Minister of State Müntefering, and I would like to welcome the next speaker. You are in a hurry because you have a follow-up appointment, and I look forward to Gunther Kriechbaum. He is chairman of the Committee on European Union Affairs of the German Bundestag, and he's a passionate European politician. And he will report about the challenges for this conference, and he will also talk about the expectations that deviate from country to country, which is also an exciting question. Mr. Kriechbaum, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Brenninkmeyer, and good evening, Professor Fabbrini, and thank you for the invitation. And I would like to welcome all the listeners. Yes, on the 9th of May, we will celebrate the Europa Day and the Conference on the Future of Europe. And I can say quite openly, I hope that this Sunday will be the only Sunday speech regarding the future of us in Europe, because there's an urgent need for us in Europe to discuss with the involvement of all citizens about how we can get more integration and more democracy in Europe. Personally, I have now been a member of the European Committee and chairman for almost 14 years, and we go through all the highs and lows. But one thing I can say, it's now high time to take the next step, following on from the Contract of Lisbon. And I hope that you can all do something with these terms. We have to look about how we in central fields of politics can come together more closely, consult more closely, because the challenges of Europe have never been higher. We're exposed to competition, economic competition with the USA, but also with China. And if we look at China, we can see we're not only exposed to economic competition, but also a competition between systems. It's a matter of asserting our values, which we consider self-assured, and we must assert these and save these in the way that we take for granted. We may think this is quite normal, but we, at the end of this century, we Europeans will account for roughly 4 or 5% of the world population. So where can we as Europeans take the arrogance to ask 95% of the world to act as we think? Only together do we have a chance. More democracy, more integration. Where are the deficits? In the last council meeting in the European Parliament, we had 2 Spitzenkandidates, none of which became president of the European Commission. We can say, let's go back to business as usual, but I think this had a fatal effect on the voters in Europe. That's why it's high time for the Conference on the Future, and the citizens that will be involved here have to come to have their say. What about the structures? The structure is as follows. As Secretary of State Müntefering mentioned, as part of an online platform, proposals have been put forward. This has opened the gates. Since the 19th of April, the gates have been opened, and we now have over 7,000 participants and over 15,000 proposals. Now we have roughly 350 events planned in this context. These ideas are now being looked at by the Commission with the involvement of external service providers, and then they will discuss them in their plenary sessions. Roughly 200 citizens will then be selected at random, and then, of course, then we have to look at how we deal with these proposals. That's a further pillar than the plenary part. This will come together, and at the moment we're still discussing about how this will happen. The business regulations have not been finalized, but 108 members of the European Parliament, 108 from national parliaments, 54 from the European Council, and 3 members of the Commission. That's the composition, but as things stand now, we still don't know whether this plenary meeting will be able to pass resolutions. So we have to assume that this will not be well received by national parliaments, because we have a legitimation from the population, but all representatives of the Commission and the Council have only derived legitimation. So at the end of the day, the so-called executive board will have to decide on all these proposals, all proposals. But at the moment, we don't yet know whether this executive board will meet publicly or non-publicly. I think it would be a fundamental error if we act behind closed doors and discuss the proposals from the citizens. We need to avoid this. And I would like to explain one thing where we're not yet sure what decision will be taken. Certainly, on the 9th of May, the festive opening and the constitutive meeting will follow at the beginning of June, and we are still late. We would like to be further on. We wanted to do this during the German presidency, but we hope that this can be now done through the Portuguese presidency. The citizens are now called on to act. Mrs. Müntefering said that where the proposals will be made. Climate is an important subject. Migration, economic strength is also an important subject. And of course, democracy, but climate change and the environment in general are important factors. Just let me mention a few of the 10 themes, because I would like to invite you to participate in this platform take part, even if now we have a competition among ideas. And it should be clear that we want to achieve greater integration. And we, as Germany, German government and the upper house are in agreement on this. But as I mentioned earlier, what about the other countries? There are differences here, and clear differences. For example, we in Germany are not excluding potential contractual amendments. And when we go into the conference, we will initially discuss the proposals, but we should work on with an open mind. If we come to amendments of treaties, we should do this and have the courage to do this. There are other countries who are far more reserved in this respect, the Scandinavian countries, for example. Even the Netherlands, just to mention a few. They would prefer not to do anything in this respect and to avoid everything. But here we have to ask, what do we really want? We have it in our own hands, and citizens can make a major contribution in this respect in terms of what Europe they want tomorrow. But, and I have to agree with Michel Müntefering, it will require tremendous solidarity among people. There's an old African proverb which says, and perhaps this could be true of Great Britain, if you want to move quickly, move alone. But if you want to go a long way, then go together. And we should go together. That means courage, determination. And so I hope that we will have a good start to the conference on the future of Europe. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Kriegfreund, thank you very much for your words. I very much look forward for the discussion. You've already put your finger on some of these sore points, and we will continue doing that in a minute. I'm really excited to see whether Germany will actually go along or probably even step forward. But now I look forward to a former fellow of the Charlemagne Prize Academy. He's a professor for EU law at the University of Dublin City, and he's a director of the Brexit Institute. And he looked at the joint declaration of the Parliament, of the Council, and the Commission on the conference of the future of Europe, scientific, and he will also give us an input now. So let's see, because he feels that the success is anything but secure, and he will tell us now why. Please welcome Professor Federico Fabbrini. You have the floor, Professor.
Thank you very much, Hendrike, for your kind introduction. And let me thank, of course, the Charlemagne Prize Foundation for inviting me. I wish I could be in Aachen now, but I am delighted of the opportunity to still engage with you, with such important speakers in this online format. I want to contribute to the conversation, adding on to what the prior speakers have said, bringing in perhaps an academic perspective on the Conference on the Future of Europe. So I'll limit myself to 3 points. First point, I think the Conference on the Future of Europe only makes sense as a process to reform the European Union. We should not forget the context in which this initiative takes place, and the context is a decade of crisis for the European Union. We have had the euro crisis, the migration crisis, the rule of law crisis, and of course, now we have had 1 year of pandemic, which has significantly challenged Europe. And at the same time, let's not forget that the idea to launch a conference on the future of Europe was put forward by French President Emmanuel Macron at the time when the United Kingdom was due to leave the European Union in the spring of 2019. And Brexit is a game-changing event for Europe. For the first time, we lost a member state. So we need to use the conference really as an opportunity to deal with the structural problems of the European Union. The conference cannot simply be a talking shop. The conference cannot be a repeat of the citizen dialogue that the European Commission has organized in the last 3 years. That's my first point. Second point, if it's true that the conference must have that ambitious plan, well, the reality is that the joint declarations by the European Parliament, Commission, and Council that is launching the process is an ambiguous document. And that is because, of course, it's a compromise between different visions that different institutions and different national governments have on this process. So on the one hand, if you read the declaration, the constitutional mission of the conference is unsettled. It is not really clear if the conference should focus on substance only or if it should also deal with institutions. Chairman Kirchbaum mentioned the Spitzenkandidaten. On the other hand, the joint declaration is ambiguous because it creates an institutional organization which is, I think, uncertain. It is not really clear what the conference should be exclusively a bottom-up process where we involve citizens and try to engage with them, or rather whether the conference should also have a more top-down element to drive the process forward. So this ambiguity is obviously creating a number of question marks ahead. And that takes me to my third point that I think is the following. If we want this project to succeed, if we want the Conference on the Future of Europe to be a meaningful exercise, there are two factors which I think are necessary, even though perhaps they might not be sufficient. The first factor is we need political leadership, and the second factor is we need legal inventiveness. What is political leadership? What I mean by that is having someone within the governance structure of the conferences that is able to drive forward the work of the project. This is something we have learned from history of European integration. If we look back at out-of-the-box initiatives like the Conference of Messina in the 1950s or the Convention on the Future of Europe in the early 2000s, we know the important, crucial role played by the like of Paul-Henri Spaak or Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. Now, who are the Paul-Henri Spaaks or the Valéry Giscard d'Estaing of the Conference on the Future of Europe? That remains to be seen. And secondly, besides political leadership, there has to be legal inventiveness. I was really pleased to hear both by Minister Müntefering and by Chairman Kirchbaum that Germany is open to contractual changes, to treaty changes, as we say in English. And I think that is indispensable. But at the same time, we are all very much aware of the challenges that go with that. Treaty changes in the EU require unanimous agreement by the member state, and the Constitution for Europe 15 years ago failed because some states opposed that. So we need to avoid that. And how to do that? Well, in my own work for the Charlemagne Foundation, I have proposed that the conference could produce a political compact. This political compact could be modeled out of the fiscal compact done in response to the euro crisis, which is an international treaty outside the EU legal order, but closely connected to the EU legal order, and with its own rules for the entry into force, which do no longer require unanimous agreement by all member states. And if we were to do that, I think we would be able to overcome the veto coming from specific member states and potentially give a long-term prospect of success to this initiative. Now, I'm pleased the European Parliament is now also endorsing that hypothesis. Obviously, this is just one of the ideas on the table, but I do think we need creative ideas for the future. And in response to what Michel was saying, indeed, I think academia is here to support in the way we can the policymakers involved in the conference. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the question and answers.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Fabbrini, and I also look forward to the question and answers. And some have actually posted some questions to participate in the discussion. And there's a very good question. We heard several times now that some competences have not been clarified. It is not clear what the structure of decision-making will look like. Why do you start the conference, somebody asked, before the competencies have been clarified? You are involved in the process, Mr. Kriechbaum. You're smiling. Can you tell us what you're thinking?
We can't hear him.
No microphone. Mr. Kriechbaum, I can't hear you right now.
Okay.
I'm sorry, of course you can't hear me.
Sorry. The European, the 9th of May is Europa Day, and of course we know how France is thinking about celebrating it, because the opening ceremony is not without reason that it's in Strasbourg. On the one hand, the European Parliament is based there, and of course it's a major French city, and that's why President Macron will attend this ceremony, and he's not going to miss that. And that's part of the future conference. And of course, we have to remember he was the person who proposed Mrs. von der Leyen. It was not Angela Merkel, it was President Macron. And ultimately, Ursula von der Leyen included this in her government program. So, of course, the two institutions, but as well as the French president, wish to do this on the 9th of May. It was Guy Verhofstadt who, as a member of the European Parliament, led the negotiations and told all the parliamentarians, if we can't make progress on these matters, then of course we can forget the 9th of May. That was probably what was needed, the shot that was needed to come to a solution in the negotiations. And today, the meeting has been postponed to tomorrow, but I hope that we will make progress. And finally, I would like to underline what Professor Fabbrini said. It would be a problem if the plenary session and the elected parliaments could come together without having the power to make decisions. That's important to resolve.
And the conference was to start a lot earlier. Then the pandemic arrived, but there was also the German presidency. Has the German presidency helped the conference on the future? I have hardly read anything about it, Mr. Kriechbaum.
I have to say in favor of the Federal Republic. It tried to do this, but the ideas, the expectations were very different, as Mr. Fabbrini just mentioned, and they are still very different. But the question is, where can we find the common ground? I think at the moment, I don't think, in my opinion, but I may be wrong, I don't think that we can return the mandate and that ultimately we will amend treaties.
May I come in on this one? Professor Fabbrini just proposed an alternative solution. How do you like that one?
Yeah, the alternative solution would be to make as much progress as possible. But
no, a parallel protocol, opening a parallel protocol like the political pact in order to, the compact, in order to avoid the problems with some member states saying, well, we won't accept any changes to the treaties.
Yes, that's why this group exists. It can't be overseen. There are countries involved that know very well that if we amend treaties, then this may require a referendum because consent is required. Unanimous voting is required for treaty amendments. And that's there are subcutaneous treaty amendments, but if we want to have real treaty amendments, we need unanimity, and that, of course, requires Ireland, which is obliged to hold a referendum, as was the case with the Contract of Lisbon, and that failed at the time. And Professor Fabbrini, as you are in Ireland, the first attempt failed, and for the second attempt, lots of compromises were needed. But including the compromise that each member state can retain its own commissioner, that's why today's reform proposals in terms of reducing the number of commissioners for new states are not particularly expedient, because they would meet with a rejection in the event of treaty amendments. But there are lots of points of reference for treaty amendments. Look at the unanimous principle required for certain foreign policy decisions. I know that there's close cooperation in defense policy, which was agreed, and also for external relations for the foreign minister, not for the defense minister. There are lots of points of reference that we can approach. And the ultimate question is, do we have the courage to challenge these institutional questions? But we will have general discussions on climate protection, environment protection. But here, I'm counting on the citizens to do their thing and to bring up these subjects, even if sometimes they don't like certain things.
The second question that fits very well. You mentioned the issues and the topics that citizens should table. Aren't they clear? And this is what they're doing on the platform. Aren't you focusing the search for ideas? I would like to address this question to you, Mr.
Kriegbaum. There are certain focal points in terms of the subjects. I think that's very sensible and correct, because if there was no structure for such a conference, then that would make things difficult. So I think the structure is very sensible, and there are 10 points, and the 10th point is other ideas. And here, I think we still leave the door open for good additional proposals, and I think this is a very sensible idea.
Professor Fabbrini, maybe for you this question. There's a comment that was posted, and the question, are there only two alternatives left? This is probably about the treaty amendments, all or nobody. What about those who don't want to say yes? You described the third option. Could you please describe it once more?
Yes, with great pleasure, and thank you for asking me this question. I want to follow up on something that Chairman Kriegbaum just said. I think I agree with him that there are actually a number of potentials within the current treaties that should be explored. But I think it's also important that we acknowledge that there is a limit to what we can do under the current legal framework. And in that sense, I endorse what he was saying in his initial remarks, that we need to move beyond Lisbon. We need to endow the European Union with an architecture which is fit for the challenges of our time. Now, the prime way to do this is actually to change the treaties. We have a procedure in place under the Treaty of Lisbon, the Lisbon Contract, that allows, of course, for the treaties to be amended. The problem is that to do so, you require unanimous agreement and unanimous ratification by all member states, some of which, including the country where I work, call for a popular referendum. Now, I don't think Ireland today is the biggest problem. Actually, it's one of the member states where support for the EU is the highest. But I think there will be other member states which are going to create a problem. And just to mention some, we know that Hungary and Poland are currently subject to an Article 7 procedure for breach of the rule of law. Those are countries where respect for the independence of the judiciary is being called into question. So we are having difficulties with that. And I think it's not hard to expect that they could veto treaty change exactly as they had tried to veto Next Generation EU, the recovery fund. So how do you move beyond this? How do you deal with a situation where we need to change the treaties, but the existing procedures are an obstacle? And this is where I've been trying to put forward an alternative, this idea for a political compact. And to be honest, it's not a sort of a groundbreaking alternative because, as I said, I am actually drawing inspiration from legal measures that were taken in the context of the euro crisis. 10 years ago, to deal with the sovereign debt crisis, we concluded the fiscal pact, we concluded the European Stability Mechanism, we concluded an agreement on the single resolution fund for banks, and all these agreements were done outside the EU, also to avoid the veto problem in changing the treaties. So they serve now as precedents to be used in the Conference on the Future of Europe. At that time, it was economic issues, economic and monetary problems. Today, I think it's more political issues, and that's why I say, let's call this the political compact. But if we use those precedents, we could do a separate treaty which can enter into force even when not all the member states are in favor of it, even when there are oppositions by a minority of countries. Now, the interesting thing to notice is, yes, the risk is that this will divide Europe. There might be countries who do not join the political compact, but we should not forget that actually there is a strong incentive for countries to still join if the majority go forward. So changing the rules of ratification also change the game and the consideration that each country has. If a country loses the right to veto, it is in a different position, and it might ultimately say, well, maybe I should really join this rather than remain outside alone. As Gunther was saying, being alone is not a great idea in the ever more competitive world we live in.
Das ist einfach wie das afrikanische Sprichwort, also besser zusammengehen als alleine.
Thank you very much, Professor Fabbrini. And there is the principle or the unanimity principle that could be done away with. We have just seen how you can position yourself as a single state, see the relationship between Hungary and China. But there is a comment on this question now. Should the EU still stick to the principle of unanimity, or shouldn't there be rather a step towards majority principles? Is this unavoidable, Mr. Kirchbaum?
Indeed, lots of decisions are made on the basis of consensus. But of course, there are majority decisions. There are both types. Perhaps if I didn't understand the question earlier, of course, certain countries that could come together and act alone. That's the process of strengthened working together. And as I just mentioned, with the defense initiative, this is part of the strengthened cooperation. That's how it came about. So some countries are moving ahead and other countries, step by step, are involved. Depending on whenever they are able to join. There is a two-speed Europe, but at the same time, there are whole areas of politics which I would like to avoid. And as Professor Fabbrini said, there are political areas where we have to tackle the treaties if we want to think about majority decisions or consider the necessity of majority decisions. And as Professor Fabbrini said, and he was right, I would like to emphasize it, particularly when it comes to the stability of the euro, the whole rescue elements, how they came about. This was not a community procedure, but we don't want to push this between different people. But the question is, at the end, is the European Parliament, the elected parliament, is it the parliament of the elected politicians? At national level, politicians are elected, but of course, we have to know where we want to get to at the end of the day. And of course, as you raise the question, Yes, there is, of course, a risk that we could render ourselves liable to blackmail, but those countries are always dependent on the benevolence of other states. So if they engage in permanent self-isolation, then they will not have much from the European Union. So these independent movements, okay, they need to be clarified at the European Court of Justice. And as you mentioned, Poland or Hungary, for me personally, the red line is respect for judgment of the ECJ. That's the red line. If this is exceeded, then indeed we can all go home, because the European Court of Justice is the independent instance in Europe that has to judge in areas of conflict.
Well, this is a wonderful concluding remark for this panel, because we have to watch the time. Professor Fabbrini, Gunter Kriechbach, thank you very much for joining in. You can join us later, the second panel, because we still have many questions in our chat, which I unfortunately cannot deal with. But in the second panel discussion, we can actually deal with this topic again and shed some light on some other aspects. Now, I would like to ask the question how the EU Commission sees the Conference on the Future of Europe and how citizens are to be involved. And nobody knows better than the Vice President, Dubravka Šuica, because she actually heads the work of the Commission on this conference. And she has said a video message. Mrs. Šuica.
Dear members of the Foundation of the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen, dear fellow Europeans, in a few days we will celebrate Europe Day. Imagine what Robert Schuman, who received the Charlemagne Prize in 1958, might say about today's European Union and the impact his vision has had on our daily lives. Today, it is not politicians alone who are shaping the future. From Cyprus to Portugal, from Finland to Spain to Aachen, through the Conference on the Future of Europe, Europeans everywhere are deliberating and engaging with each other and policymakers to shape the future European Union they want. Since 1950, with this prize, the city of Aachen honors those who distinguish themselves through their outstanding work on European unity. Today, the Conference on the Future of Europe offers citizens from all walks of life and all corners of the Union, from the mountains to the islands, a new opportunity to engage and contribute to the European project. Technology has altered the way we live, we work, we communicate, and we connect. Democracy itself is not static and constantly evolves. Politicians and decision makers must evolve along with it. We must make our democracy fit for the future. People's attitudes and expectations have shifted. Citizens are eager to have a greater say in democracy beyond elections. It is clear that politics can no longer be business as usual. The conference is our answer to that call. Through the conference, the three European institutions, namely European Parliament, the Council and European Commission, are speaking with one voice. This is unprecedented, but we cannot act alone. We are joined by national parliaments, regional and local authorities, as well as with civil society and social partners. This truly ambitious conference reinforces our representative democracy by responding to the demands of citizens, by bringing them into the heart of policy making in the European Union. I insist that citizens must be at the center of our thinking on the conference. Through the three pillars of the conference, the multilingual digital platform, the European citizens panels, and the conference plenaries, everyone can participate. On 19th of April, we launched a multilingual online digital platform. The platform creates a public space for people right across the European Union to engage. People can share ideas, find events, and follow the progress and outcomes of the conference. You can do this in German, as in all 24 official European languages are available. All contributions from local events, European citizens panels, and conference plenaries are shared on the platform. You will also find 9 key topics for debate and deliberation. These range from climate change to social justice and jobs. But this list is not exhaustive. We have created an open box for citizens who want to engage on other topics of interest too. The European Citizens Panels are designed for citizens' input. These panels are composed of randomly selected citizens free from vested interests or politics. They will deliberate and come up with ideas and policy recommendations that will feed into the conference plenary and into the final report, which will feed into future European Union policy making. There will also be German citizens in these panels. And the plenary will be the place where citizens can voice their views alongside their elected representatives. We must have confidence in the ability of citizens to contribute concretely. The conference does not replace representative democracy, it only reinforces it. What is new is that, based on the input of citizens, the conference will make proposals on the kind of Europe we want in the future, so it is important that everyone participates. A robust feedback mechanism will ensure that ideas on the platform will result in concrete recommendations for European Union action. And when the conference draws its conclusions in the spring of 2022, the work does not stop. The three institutions will reflect on what the citizens have deliberated and on how we can best follow up on it. President von der Leyen has committed to this, and I intend to see it through. This conference is an historic, unprecedented exercise in deliberative democracy at the European level. We are bringing citizens into the heart of policymaking in the European Union. To Aachen and citizens across Germany and the European Union, the future is in your hands. Make your voice heard.
Well, thank you very much, the Vice President of the European Commission, Dubravka Šuica. And you, dear participants, can send further comments for the next panel discussion. But now we can actually look forward to the next live presentation presented by Christian Moos, member of the European Economic and Social Committee. He is also the Secretary General of the European Union and the board member of the European Movement Germany. And he deals with the role of civil society that enables progress and what are the tasks resulting. Mr. Moos, I can see you already. You have the floor, Mr. Moos.
Madam Vice President, Mr. Freund, Mrs. Pornschläger, Professor Prefi, many thanks for the invitation. Mrs. Brenninkmeyer, ladies and gentlemen. The debate on the future of Europe is much older than the idea of the conference, which is going to be inaugurated in 3 days' time. As European citizens, we are all stakeholders of this future. The prospects of our children's lives, our very existence, depend on it. We ought to acknowledge that the European model is based on universal values. It is based on the Magna Carta, on habeas corpus, on the Declaration of Human Rights, on human dignity and the freedom of the individual. This model has been challenged. Illiberal democracy, authoritarian threats and populist temptations, chauvinism and the nationalist backlash are threatening this European way of life and hence its future. Therefore, the conference on the future of Europe must be more than a mere consultative exercise with no tangible results. It is about time for decisions that strengthen the European way of life. Europe's citizens need to regain trust in the European method and its institutions, for otherwise they are doomed to witness a slow but steady decay of the order that was established after the Second World War. A vital society is of fundamental importance for any modern liberal democracy. Where citizens do not organize themselves in free associations, there cannot be democracy. Civil society associations are a strong barrier against populism and authoritarian dystopia. It is therefore quite worrying that some political forces are questioning the role of the European Economic and Social Committee. The European Economic and Social Committee gives civil society voice in Europe. Involving citizens in policymaking is a must, but this must not be done at the expense of the involvement of the associations through which they organize their political and cultural, social and economic lives. The future of Europe depends on above all, on the sense of responsibility of its democratically elected leaders and not on flighty moods and opinions that are being under constant fire of campaigns aiming at destroying trust in democratic and representative institutions. Will anyone come to the defense of our parliaments and representative democracy once representative civil society has been sidelined and reduced to a half-life in the shadows of a public sphere dominated by populist heroines and heroes stirring the masses to cathartic hysteria? The future of Europe is precisely about this choice, the new great struggle of our time. It is about freedom or servitude. The ESC is committed to engaging with the citizens and giving them a real say in the debate on the future of Europe through a European-wide network of the social partners and civil society organizations it represents. Despite its difficult start, the ESC is bent on contributing to the success of this conference. It is activating its networks in the member states and at the European level to give life to the debate. It is our firm belief that European citizens are ready for a European sense of community. The world is in turmoil, stirred by the ascent of new powers, challenged by technological transformation and economic and social cleavages, threatened by climate change, and currently sharing the suffering of the pandemic. There is a new European narrative. It is that of securing the European way of life, that is, our universal values, in an era of change and unprecedented global challenges. How should Europe meet these challenges with success without an active and pluralist economic and social life? How should it prevail without its multitude of civil society organizations through which citizens with their various beliefs, experiences and identities actively participate day by day in shaping its future? Civil society organizations are guardians of the common good. They are automatic stabilizers for liberal democracy and the rule of law. The ESC bridges the gap between policymakers and civil society, between civil society organizations at the national and at the European level. The ESC will assume its role via its members in the conference plenary and the executive board. We call for the establishment of a dashboard in order to ensure a transparent follow-up of suggestions from the plenary, including an explanation why proposals are not followed up. The conference must be a success because too much is at stake and way too much time has been lost already. The attitude of some governments which do not want any follow-up and no binding results is dangerous for the future of Europe. We hope that the voice of civil society, of European citizens will be heard directly in the fora of the conference, but not less through the elected representatives and through representative civil society. In the coming months, a lot will depend on the pro-European political forces that still prevail in the European institutions, in most national parliaments, and in our civil society organizations. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank you, Mr. Moos. We will discuss about the points you made, but some positive news. According to a survey published by the Commission and the Parliament, half the citizens in the EU would be interested in participating in this conference. This is quite a sizable magnitude and a potential that we should not leave by the wayside. And the next speaker will be happy to hear this because he works as a member of the European Parliament, and he also represents the European Greens, and he comes from Aachen, by the way. And I look forward to Daniel Freund's presentation.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Brenninkmeyer, and thank you to the Charlemagne Prize Fellowship for the invitation this evening. As we've heard, this context that the European Union has been faced with crises in recent years: Brexit, the Euro crisis, migration, dealing with the economic fallout of Corona. We can see that Europe always finds in a crisis situation where integration and progress is half done. We have a common currency, but we don't have a common economic policy or common tax policy, no social policy, and that's why the differences have created a crisis situation with migration. We had Schengen with no borders, but we didn't have a common approach in terms of asylum policy or migration, and that's created a crisis. And I think the lesson from this crisis, and many people realize this, is that we have to take decisions. Do we want to work closer together as Europeans, or do we want to retract to our national context and try to face the major challenges as small countries? And for me, it's quite clear, no country in the European Union can stop climate change by itself. No country can ensure that large groups pay their fair share of tax, and no country can by itself ensure that our interests, our European values are represented adequately on the world stage. That's why we need this next step towards integration. Of course, we have the experience of the failed treaty negotiations, the referendums in the Netherlands and in France. For 10 years, my experience was that if in Brussels we had debates on Europe and we advocated greater integration, treaty amendments, and people looked at one another as if we were crazy. And I think we've now changed somewhat since Brexit. Certainly following the last European elections, I think many people have realized that we cannot just get bogged down the status quo that ensures that the centrifugal forces of the anti-Europeans get stronger and stronger. And if we don't approach the problems of the European Union, these opposing forces will become stronger and stronger. So from the very start of this legislative period in the European Parliament, we've been clear, we want to try, and we want to try in a different manner than in the past, especially by putting the people at the focal point from the very beginning. When we started working on this 2 years ago and looking at the situation, we saw how wonderful these citizens' councils in Ireland work, and at the end they had a referendum and approved marriage for everyone and the right to abortion. And these were problems that got bogged down in Europe for decades, but now a big majority supported these decisions. And I think we have similar developments in the European Union. If we ask the citizens, and there are broad majorities for greater cooperation, for a more ambitious climate policy, for greater cooperation, for example, in dealing migration and refugees. So our idea through this conference is to take the first step along this road. It's not a constitutional matter. It won't change treaties at the end of this conference, but it's a conference that is intended to organize majorities, create political pressure so that finally we can make progress on all these political challenges. We've mentioned some of the risks in the previous presentations. We Greens want a federal European republic, a fully bicameral democracy with a full European Parliament that is elected in genuine European elections. We want a budget that allows the EU to tackle the major challenges of our time. And we hope that this conference on the future of Europe, with the support of the citizens and of course with society as a whole, will set a process in motion where at the end we've made some steps in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Freund. And we have received a few more questions. But before we start the discussion, I look forward to the input by the current fellow at the Charlemagne Prize Academy. She is also a think tank member, a policy advisor at the Brussels Institute and at the European Policy Center, and she worked on European policy and EU institutions. Mrs. Bornschläger, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the invitation. A lot has been said about the conference, so I will try to keep things brief. As we've seen, some people look for treaty amendments, others for a more deliberative process, and you can see opinions differ here. I would like to outline briefly the possible challenges at this conference, because there is a major risk of the conference failing, and we don't want that. The first thing that's already been mentioned, 1 year is a very short time to achieve results. The conference has been postponed by a year, officially because of Corona, but also because the EU institutions were unable to agree on the structure. So you can see how difficult it is to start new initiatives in the EU. In addition, there's the question of whether the timing was chosen correctly. We will soon have the Slovenian presidency, and we don't know if they're Europe friendly. Then we will have the German federal elections and the French presidential elections. So the two biggest states will be occupied with themselves, and whether or not they will be able to devote much time to the conference is not clear. The second point is that, in my view, the objective is not quite clear. I'm not really sure what we want to achieve through the conference. The joint declaration says we want to prescribe the direction of Europe in the future. This is very broad. There are working programs of the Commission, strategic guidelines of the Council. So the question is, what can citizens add? Should they go beyond this, beyond the 27, if there are new financial frameworks? That's a question. And also another question is, are we talking about deliberative democracy where results are open, or are we interested in talking broadly about Europe and about the future, which would be more of a communication campaign? So I'm not really sure what direction the Conference on the Future wants to take. As I've just mentioned, there are many outstanding questions, as Mr. Kriegbaum said. For example, the conference plenary, we don't know what decision-making powers they have, and now this is very important to establish this at the start of the conference. And 2 points, and I think I need to talk somewhat more slowly for the interpreters, but the EU, people have mentioned briefly there's a lack of political leadership. That up until today, the governance structure has been fairly bureaucratic. There's a 3-man team in the presidency, then an executive committee, a plenary session, and the question is, where are the leaders who are capable of managing all of this? Because this is a major initiative. And my last point concerning the challenges, it's already been mentioned briefly, the fact that we need the political backing. All national governments don't all find the conference good. Not everyone is in favor of treaty amendments. I'm very pleased that the German government is in favor of this, but other countries see things differently, and there are 27 countries. And in addition, the European Council has made it very clear that the existing legislation procedures are not to be changed. So the question is, how can the conference contribute towards the institutional design of the EU? As I mentioned briefly before, one of the most important points that needs to be discussed is, if we really want to introduce more deliberative procedures, which would be very positive for citizens to give them more say, then the question is, what results would this produce? Let me mention Macron, who has created a climate convention. The results were very ambitious. But then the French government didn't find this so good after all, and this can lead to frustration. And this would be fatal for the EU because it has found very great difficulties with the climate crisis, with Brexit and the migration crisis. So we have to be wary of not creating too much damage to the conference. Now, having been very critical, I would like to talk about possible solutions. I think the conference will take place. It will start on Sunday. So we have to make the best of it. And from the civil society perspective, it's very important to cooperate as a civilian society and to exert pressure on national governments and the EU institutions, not just in Germany, but in other countries, to clarify outstanding questions concerning the conference and to take questions that have to be discussed in 1 year, to take them seriously. Again, talking about solutions, we have to monitor and event the conference, to evaluate the conference, to learn from it, try to make recommendations. And the European Policy Center wants to set up a conference observatory to perform these tasks. And last but not least, it's very important to think beyond the conference in terms of how deliberative procedures can be introduced in the EU. A year is a very short time. And in May 22, that year will have passed. I don't think this was... I think this is the last initiative, and so it's important to draw conclusions next year, to take the results seriously and hopefully build something more permanent in order to introduce deliberative democracy in the EU. I tried to keep things short, and I look forward to the discussion.
Well, great. And you're cordially invited. Thank you very much for your contribution, Mrs. Pornschlegel. You really put the finger on the sore points. You said that I found very interesting that the civil society organizations are important. Mr. Moos, one comment for you, because you see yourself as a representative of civil society in this body. How do the EU institutions want to succeed to really reach out to the public at large? So apart from the interested bubble, so let's be practical. We've got the platform, the digital one. I clicked on it, but I don't know how many other people did. I was told at the press conference for the opening of this digital platform, there were 56 people online followed this opening live. This is not a lot.
Thank you very much for the question. Of course, you can contribute with your colleagues and with public law medias in terms of using prime time, not only reporting on Sunday, but use the opportunities for greater coverage. And also important, not much time has passed since the 19th of April, and the participation is clear. And it's clear this is going on in all countries, and we don't have just Germans that are interested. We have other Europeans who are interested, and not only they are taking part. It's very important for all Europeans to take part. We can make a contribution as the civil society. We have umbrella organizations, trade unions, to campaign for the most varying interests, employers, social associations. We have many members, millions of members. Many people have multiple memberships. And we have to participate, have to take the discussion into our organization, to the media, which we are doing. Where I'm working, for example, we are involved in this, and we've had a debate with EU MEPs, with Niklas Minas and with Hildegard Emtele. We talked about the conference on the future of Europe, including with our youth representatives. European, you can see, is doing a lot. We're talking about lots of national committees. Germany doesn't have these, but we are talking, for example, with the European movement in Germany, where we're preparing things. And I think at the latest, in autumn, we will be able to start things moving so that the forums can start working.
Question again from the participants, it would be helpful if the EU could actually provide a budget line, money, funding for Citizens' Council. And that's a question for Mr. Freund.
Until now, in terms of financing this conference, not much is clear. What I've seen in the debates thus far is that we have this major meeting of citizens at European level. It's financed by the European Parliament, and the European Parliament is the institution that will organize the conference plenary session in the EU parliamentary buildings, and the people not prepared to participate at the moment are the member states' governments. They're refusing all financial contributions. Some governments are doing their own thing, having their own events on a national level. But in terms of paying into a common European pot to make the conference a success, well, we've not seen much in that respect. One word on the question of how we can really get the conference established in people's minds. It can only be a success if a significant share realize that it's taking place, and better still participate in the debates and make suggestions. I think the best best method of getting participation is to send very clear signals that we mean things seriously. It's not just a forum for complaints to receive online complaints and where you don't hear anything for years. It must be clear that at the end of the year, this online platform establishes the agenda for the conference, and at the end of the day, proposals will be implemented. So everybody has to become involved in passing legislation, and people have to take things sufficiently seriously so that we can really implement the proposals.
But this is really a crucial point. What I heard in Brussels is several times well, we hope that this conference is going to be a big thing, but many people are skeptical about it. I can live with it, but whether it's really put into practice is another question. The process is not very clear. I have to honestly say I joined the platform. And you actually enter a discussion, and I can't even see whether minutes are being taken, whether the ideas are taken on board. I don't know. I suppose it's happening, but I don't know how it's happening. Mr. Freund, do you know that?
Many things are fluid at the moment. As we've mentioned many times, we are still negotiating, and the decision has been postponed to tomorrow morning. The decision in terms of decision-making powers of the conference plenary session. We've not even started the debate about the objectives of the conference. So we could have been better prepared. We could have done things better. But in the last 1.5 years, we've had to deal with blockades by member state governments, because on the day when the online platform goes live, 12 governments come with a joint letter to say, okay, fine, but we exclude any fundamental changes, no treaty changes. That's the hurdle that we have to overcome. We have to create sufficient public pressure. We have to create the debate so that the MEPs, the citizens, and civil society come together to say we really want this change, then we can overcome the blockades of these member states. Because even if it doesn't happen at the end of the conference, but the message must be clear. If we want what's come out of the conference, then at the latest, when the next European elections take place, we have the chance to vote, or even at national level to vote for parties that want to.
This can backfire at you. I said something, but nobody actually took note of it. Now I resign 100% in terms of the EU. Do you think that there is this clear risk? Well, yes, I think there is this risk. And of course, you accept this risk if you start such an initiative. Let me comment on one point. A point where you have to create the pressure, the political pressure, to make sure that the national governments back it up. But I wonder whether this is really possible in view of the high blockades. And this is why I mentioned that we have to learn from the difficulties encountered with this conference and to think in longer terms to ensure that such initiatives as promoting deliberative democracy can actually be on a longer term. And this is not a contradiction to what I said before. You also have to watch out that you don't actually compare two things. A say for European citizens does not mean that you have more legitimacy for the EU. This is what you might think, but this is not always the case. If you have a stronger say, then it can also just mean, well, the EU, well, we don't want to change the treaties. And this is why I think that it is so important that things also happen on the national level, not only on the EU level, so that you try to Europeanize the national parties, let them think more European, and to actually strengthen the bilateral relationships. The Aachen contract or treaty is a very, very good example. And I talk to many people who are not involved in EU policy and who are not so much interested in the other states. I think there's still a big gap in terms of knowledge among the elites. The right Europe doesn't take place in Brussels, and I'm saying this although I'm working in Brussels, but it also happens in the other national capitals. So it means you have to understand what's happening in Warsaw, for instance, to understand the political landscape there, what people think there, and why the Polish government is so skeptical, although the Polish citizens love the EU. So these internal differences must be understood. And the national European policies, this is an important aspect. What can the EESC do? What do your members say?
Certainly, we represent many representative major society organizations. We have many partners, many interested parties, and our top subject at the moment for this year, and that will take us into next year, is to accompany this process, to form alliances, to create partnerships so that we can be present on site, and we hope that depending on the pandemic, we hope that this can be done face-to-face in October, and to go beyond the structures that we represent, with all members who are represented in sports associations or charitable organizations, sports clubs or cultural associations. They're active, and we have to find people there. And I think that's very, very important.
Yes. Mr. Freund, a question for you. If citizens propose institutional reforms, how long would such an implementation actually take? This takes us to the point of the three institutions. Mrs. Suica spoke of the three institutions speaking with one voice now, and that this was unprecedented. And I wondered whether this could probably block the new process of implementation.
It's important in this context for this conference that it's important that it's being organized by the three institutions, but we also have to say that the lines of conflict between the three institutions at the moment are such that in the European Parliament we have a uniform line from extreme right to the communist. And at the moment, we are we still can't agree on the launch for Sunday with the European institutions. Those are the lines of conflict. To what extent we can talk about solidarity? Well, that's open for everyone to interpret for themselves. But if at the end, in this plenary session, national parliamentarians and Europeans and governments say we want to make certain amendments, institutional, legislative, then things could happen quickly because the participants are around the table, and then we could implement things quite quickly. But it depends to a certain extent what precisely we're talking about. Some things have to go through national parliaments. This could take 9 months or so. But I would say at least that one of the debates that we have to hold is how will we conduct the next European election, because all the parties will have Spitzenkandidates. They can't all win, so we can't have a situation where at the next European Parliament we stand for election again knowing that things will not work. So we have to say either we change the rules or we will at least do things in an honest way where we don't have Spitzenkandidates. We have a situation where who heads the commission we'll see after the elections.
So national lists would be out of reach too. Do you see citizens responsible to exert pressure to obtain the candidates, the Spitzenkandidates?
Yeah, I think if we were to say to citizens, well, 25 to 40 places are elected from a transnational list, then many people will have question marks and ask, what are we talking about? If we discuss with citizens about how European democracy should function, what are their ideas? Do they want to decide at elections in terms of the allocation of the top positions in Brussels? Then I think that's something that many people will understand and where they will be interested in becoming involved in the discussion. And I'm constantly seeing when I talk to people think we got that already. They think there are initiatives for the European Parliament that don't understand how we can have a parliament that doesn't set its own agenda, that doesn't introduce legislation itself or decide where it should actually meet. So I think citizens, there are many points where citizens are a step farther than the actual rules.
And could therefore influence the standing rules to be closer to their reality or what they expect. I would like to answer 2 questions because we're moving towards the close of this call. How realistic is it for such countries as Poland or Hungary to be won over for more profound reforms? Mr. Freund.
Yeah, gladly. Of course, we should try to avoid allowing ourselves to be maneuvered into a situation where we produce a nice result of the conference, which ultimately meets with a veto from Warsaw or Budapest. But before Christmas, when we were talking about the 7-year budget, about the rule of law principles, we had a situation where there was a veto from these 2 countries. And this veto was overcome when we seriously thought about thinking we could do things without them if necessary. Of course, we want to involve them, but we did talk about legal possibilities of ultimately doing things without them. And I think the other possibility would be as part of a greater reform package. When we talk, if we have money in question, if we're talking about a European climate fund, about reforming our European economy towards climate neutrality, then that is something where I think Poland and Hungary will not ultimately want to be breaking ranks when it comes to money. So I think that's how we have to shape a reform package and include something for everybody that will give us a chance.
It just has to be attractive enough. Another question. In view of the fact that it is not clear whether all of the ideas end up in the plenary, wouldn't it make sense to have like separate channels available for the executive board of the European Parliament for sending or submitting ideas? This is a technicality and a question that I ask myself, because you can open up an issue and table an issue anytime. Would you actually opt for the avenue that has been pre-selected, or could we also actually opt for alternative ways? What would you advise us to do as a think tanker? I just saw that, Mr. Moos wanted to actually answer. No, I can kick off and Mr. Moos can come in. Yes, Mr. Moos.
Okay, Mrs. Brenninkmeyer, begin.
A difficult question.
Also ich glaube, natürlich sollte man versuchen, auf jeden Fall die Ergebnisse oder zumindest den Druck zu erhöhen. Ich glaube, man sollte schon die Governance-Struktur nutzen,
the governance structure should be used the way it is, but it is definitely important to try to do as much as possible and to make the best of it. I think civil society has to step in and go forward because the institutions make it very difficult with all of the various players. I also wanted to cover or touch upon Hungary and Poland. I think there is a big gap between the idealism of the pro-European parliamentarians and the governments, and this reality needs to be bridged and accepted. And that's difficult if you say from the outset, we want to have treaty amendments. So make sure that the recommendations that you make fit reality. It sounds like spoiling the game, but it is really key when we want to make any progress in integration. You really have to watch out what the 27 governments or national cultures want to see at the end of the day. And in fact, not all of them have this pro-European German view. They don't share this, and you often forget this. One point I want to mention regarding the digital platform, unfortunately saw Fidesz an event selected for the Christian democratic values. You really have to make sure that the conference is not instrumentalized for purposes such as criticizing the EU. And I think this is very important to watch out and make sure that this doesn't happen. But again, there is this backdrop of the deliberative democracy, because this would mean that citizens simply sit together and that there is no preset result, predetermined result. But I think you hope that you will make the best of it, and I do hope that until the 9th of May, many of the outstanding questions can be answered and open issues can be resolved, especially for the citizens panels that are so important. To conclude, I would like to get a brief outlook. Looking back in a year's time, how we will view this conference. Will it be a game changer when we judge it in hindsight in a year from now? Will it be a moment of history playing a role in Europe? Or would it be a nice talk shop and a nice try to be as honest as possible? Mr. Freund.
I'm doing everything to ensure that the thing will be a success. I think success can be defined on two levels: the process itself, the process to being successful, to ensure that this online platform functions. And the second aspect is the political level. Will something happen at the end of the day? And I'm very optimistic that we will set something in motion. We will not have to rewrite all the treaties. I think there is a chance that one or two specific projects will emerge from the contract with specific changes.
Well, Mr. Moos, what do you think? Will this also work in the other 27 member states? Will the citizens really join in? The ones who want to join in, will they achieve something?
I think that we have the opportunity to achieve that. And I think we should note that the citizens are not stupid. They want to participate, they want deliberation, no question, involvement. But they also know quite exactly that the capacity to act is important, and that the elected representatives, they are of central importance, very important. And of course, governments must live up to their responsibilities. And at the moment, these governments have their foot on the brake. And we know they have to show responsibility for the future. And that is what people expect, because the debate on the future is older than this conference. And the answers to the questions that have been raised have not yet been provided.
That's true. Mrs. Ponschlik, how do you view this? Hashtag, what was the hashtag? For die Zukunft gehört dir, that was the hashtag. The future is all yours.
Das kann ich jetzt noch nicht sagen. Ich glaube, bis dahin müssen wir in den nächsten Monaten warten.
We'll have to wait and see for the next few months
und ich hoffe sehr auf Herrn
whether
Freund,
the
dass da die
executive
Blockaden
board will
bald vorbei sind und dass wir ein bisschen mehr
succeed in
wissen. Und dann
bringing down
können
the
wir, glaube ich,
blockades. Then we will
auch das
know more,
evaluieren.
and
Ich
then
glaube,
we
die
can
Gefahr ist
evaluate
da.
it properly.
Auf
I think there
Englisch
is a
gibt es einen
risk.
Satz, der sagt,
There's a
overpromise and
beautiful sentence,
underdeliver. Ich hoffe,
overpromise
dass
and
es das nicht
underdeliver.
wird, sondern
This
dass
is
es
what the
eher
Brits say.
andersrum wird.
I
Aus
hope
meiner
that
Sicht
it's
ist
going
es
to turn
besonders
out the
wichtig,
other way
dass
around.
es
To
ein
my mind,
Monitoring
this is
gibt und eine
particularly
Evaluation und dass wir auf
important
jeden
that
Fall
we
aus
have
diesem Prozess
monitoring and
lernen, weil ich glaube, dieser
evaluation, that we learn
Lernprozess,
from this
das
process, because
ist
this
keine
learning
einfache Initiative,
process
die da gestartet
is
wurde. Es ist
not
sehr
simply an
ambitioniert und ich
initiative.
glaube, wenn
It
wir
is highly
es schaffen,
ambitious, and
aus
if we
dieser
really
Konferenz auch
manage
dann im
to
Nachgang
learn
etwas zu
lessons from
ziehen,
this
dann ist es ein Erfolg
conference, to
geworden.
get some
Und mein
input
Wunsch ist es
and an
vielleicht
outcome,
zuletzt
then it's
auch,
good.
dass
And
die
my last
EU die
wish is
Bürgerdimension auch
that
über die Konferenz
the
hinaus mitdenkt. Also zum Beispiel, dass es auch
actually
mehr zwischenmenschliche
includes the
Solidarität gibt,
citizens'
dass der
dimension
europäische
beyond this
Zusammenhalt gewährt wird
conference,
nach der
that
Corona-Krise
there's
und
more
natürlich auch, dass die EU
cooperation
vor
after
allem
the
auch die
corona
Ergebnisse
crisis,
liefert,
and
die sie
that the
jetzt
EU
an den
gives
Projekten,
the
die sie gerade
results
arbeitet, ob es jetzt zum Beispiel die digitale
for the
Transformation ist
projects,
oder
whether
der
it's
Green Deal und der Just Transition
transformation
Fund. Ich glaube,
or the
das
Just
wird auch schon
Transition
sehr, sehr viel
Fund,
dazu beitragen, dass die
and this will
Legitimität
make
der
a
EU in den nächsten Jahren
major
gestärkt wird.
contribution to ensuring the legitimacy of the EU over the next few years. Maybe it would be a good idea to leave this digital platform live after the end of the conference, because it's a comprehensive tool that maybe the citizens of the EU could use afterwards. I am very excited where it will be in 1 year from now. The corona lockdown is not history yet, but the major economic challenges are only becoming visible very gradually. I think we're in for a true acid test for Europe. And there's lots of stumbling stones within the EU. Then data protection. There are many things to do. I do hope that we will help to introduce this to the public at large. And I do hope that this conference will have been a positive minute in the history of Europe. I would like to thank you, Sophie Pornschlegel, Mr. Freund, and Mr. Moos. And I'd like to thank you. And I will hand back to the directors and Professor Prefi with thank you for actually making this possible. I think it was very important to have this forum.
Liebe Frau
Mrs. Brenninkmeyer,
das war ganz wunderbar.
That was wonderful. I would like to express my thanks for the excellent moderation. I think
spannende 2 Stunden
you have accompanied us through 2 interesting hours. Many subjects have been raised. And
vom internationalen Karlspreis, dass wir mehr Europa brauchen und nicht weniger Europa, das ist gar keine Frage. Die Beteiligung der Bürger halten wir für absolut notwendig. Beteiligung schafft Engagement und Beteiligung bringt auch dazu, Verantwortung zu übernehmen. Wir haben gehört, dass wenn man nichts tut, die Dinge, die einem eigentlich selbstverständlich erscheinen, auch ganz schnell perdu sein können. Und von daher ist eben genau dieses Engagement und diese Verantwortung der Bürger auch hier gefragt. Und wollen wir schnell gehen und alleine? Ja, wohin führt das? Ich glaube nicht, dass wir dahin wollen. Und die Demokratie ist manchmal langsamer als die Autokratie, das sehen wir auch in der Pandemie, aber da wollen wir ja gar nicht hin. Ja? Und deswegen wollen wir gemeinsam in einem demokratischen, wertebasierten System, so wie wir es kennen, weitermachen. Und da kann diese Konferenz einen Beitrag leisten. Wir haben, sagen wir mal, über Probleme gesprochen, und wer über Probleme spricht oder Dinge, die ihm nicht gefallen, der oder die möge dann bitte auch sagen, wie es denn sein sollte. So haben wir für meinen Geschmack viel über Risiken gesprochen, aber wir haben auch sehr schöne Vorschläge gehört, die
proposals,
in einer solchen Konferenz eine Rolle spielen und vielleicht auch in einem Ergebnis stehen können. Das hat mir sehr gut gefallen. Ich habe auch gehört, wir sprechen über einen Bundesstaat Europa, also die föderative Struktur, habe ich von den Grünen gehört. Das hat mir auch sehr gut gefallen. Ich glaube, das war auch mal eine Idee der Gründerväter des Karlspreises. Ja, wunderbar. Ich darf mich bei Ihnen bedanken, Frau Brenninkmeyer. Ich darf mich bei den Diskutanten bedanken, bei den Impulsgebern. Ich darf mich aber auch bei den Foristen bedanken, die hier also sehr intensiv gechattet haben. Wir haben das in Twitter live verfolgt. Das war eine sehr engagierte Diskussion. Ja, hinter uns, oder hinter mir genauer gesagt, sehen Sie den Aachener Dom und davor eine ganze Menschenmenge, so wie sie zum Karlspreis üblicherweise zusammenkommt. Es ist ein Bürgerpreis. Und ja, das haben wir jetzt letztes Jahr nicht gesehen und dieses Jahr werden wir es auch nicht sehen. Traditionell wird der Karlspreis am Himmelfahrtstag verliehen. Das ist nächste Woche. Und wir haben Klaus Johannes, also auch einen sehr honorigen Preisträger, schon letztes Jahr gewählt und die Verleihung ist jetzt geplant für den 2. Oktober. Ja, am 2. Oktober sind wir, was das Thema Corona und Pandemie angeht, hoffentlich einen Schritt weiter, und zwar in die richtige Richtung, sodass wir auch wieder mit Bürgern umgehen können und eben nicht nur digital und auf Abstand uns miteinander auseinandersetzen müssen. So hoffen wir, dass es dann zum Karlspreis am 2. Oktober so aussieht, wie eben hinter mir, nämlich, dass wir wieder mit vielen europäischen Bürgern zusammenkommen können und im Vorfeld der Verleihung im Rahmenprogramm können wir dann vielleicht auch schon eine erste Bestandsaufnahme machen, was denn die Konferenz für die Zukunft Europas denn bis dahin gebracht hat. Dann ist etwa Halbzeit und ich denke, dann wird man schon ein Zwischenfazit ziehen können. Ja, ich darf mich bei unseren Partnern bedanken, bei unseren Sponsoren bedanken. Ich wünsche Ihnen einen guten Abend und in diesen Zeiten sagt man wohl auch, bleiben Sie gesund.
And as I was also say, stay safe and healthy.